The woman sitting alone on the weathered bench outside the general store had not spoken a single word in the 3 months since she arrived in Rock Springs, Wyoming. And that silence drew Isaac Norwood to her like a moth to flame. It was the summer of 1876, and the small mining town buzzed with constant noise. Men shouted over card games in the saloons, merchants hawked their wares on dusty streets, and the sound of pickaxes striking rock echoed from the surrounding hills from dawn until dusk. Everyone had something to say, some story to tell, some complaint to voice. Everyone except her. Isaac had come down from his cabin in the mountains to trade pelts and restock supplies when he first saw her. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching the world pass by with eyes the color of spring grass. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she wore a plain gray dress that had seen better days. What struck him most was not her appearance, though she was lovely in an understated way, but the profound stillness that surrounded her like an invisible shield. He watched from across the street as townspeople passed her by, some offering greetings that went unanswered, others casting curious or pitying glances her way. She acknowledged no one, yet her silence did not seem rude or dismissive. It simply was, as natural as breathing. Isaac was a man who understood silence. He had spent the last 8 years living alone in the mountains, trapping and hunting, visiting Rock Springs only when necessary. At 28 years old, he stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle from years of splitting wood, hauling game, and surviving in the wilderness. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, often tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was full but neatly trimmed. His eyes were a deep brown, thoughtful and observant. Most people found him intimidating at first glance, but those who knew him understood he was a man of few words and great depth. He loaded his supplies onto his pack mule, but his gaze kept drifting back to the woman on the bench. Something about her called to him, though he could not name what it was. Perhaps it was recognizing a kindred spirit, someone else who found peace in quiet rather than the endless chatter that filled most lives. As he prepared to leave town, Isaac made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of heading directly back to his mountain cabin, he tied his mule to the post near the general store and walked slowly toward the bench. The woman did not look up as he approached, though he was certain she was aware of his presence. Isaac stood there for a moment, considering what to say, then realized the foolishness of that impulse. If she did not speak, what good would words do? Instead, he simply sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. He said nothing. He did not introduce himself or ask her name. He simply sat, watching the same dusty street she watched, listening to the same sounds, sharing the same silence. Minutes passed. The woman's posture did not change, but Isaac sensed a subtle shift in the air between them, as if she had acknowledged his presence in some wordless way. He stayed there for nearly an hour, asking nothing of her, expecting nothing in return. When he finally stood to leave, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell and walked back to his mule. The woman did not turn to watch him go, but Isaac felt lighter somehow, as if that shared silence had been a conversation more meaningful than any words could convey. He returned to his cabin in the mountains, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the quiet woman in Rock Springs. Over the next 2 weeks, as he checked his trap lines and hunted deer in the high country, he found himself planning another trip to town far sooner than usual. When Isaac rode back into Rock Springs on a hot afternoon in late June, his heart beat faster as he scanned the street. There she was, in the same spot, sitting with that same peaceful stillness. Relief washed over him. though he had not realized until that moment how much he had feared she might be gone. He conducted his business quickly, trading pelts at the trading post and picking up flour, coffee, and other essentials. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he walked to the bench and sat down beside her. This time he noticed details he had missed before. Her hands bore the calluses of hard work, and though her dress was worn, it was clean and carefully mended. She smelled faintly of lavender soap. A small basket sat at her feet, containing what looked like freshly picked wildflowers. They sat in silence for over an hour. Isaac felt no need to fill the quiet with meaningless words. He simply existed beside her, and she beside him, two islands of stillness in a chaotic world. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the street, Isaac noticed a group of miners emerging from the saloon. They were loud and clearly drunk, stumbling and laughing as they made their way down the boardwalk. One of them, a heavy-set man with a red face, noticed the woman on the bench. "Hey there, quiet lady," he called out, his words slurring together. "Still not talking? What is wrong with you?" "Cat got your tongue." His companions laughed, and they began to move toward the bench. Isaac felt his muscles tense, though he remained outwardly calm. The woman's expression did not change, but he saw her hands tighten slightly in her lap. The drunk miner reached the bench and loomed over them, swaying on his feet. "I am talking to you, woman. It is rude not to answer when someone speaks to you." Isaac slowly stood, rising to his full height. He said nothing, but he positioned himself between the miner and the woman, his body language making his intentions clear. The miner had to tilt his head back to meet Isaac's eyes, and what he saw there made him stumble backward. "We do not want any trouble," one of the other miners said, grabbing his friend's arm. "Come on, Dutch. Leave them alone." The red-faced miner seemed about to protest, but another look at Isaac's imposing frame and steady gaze changed his mind. He muttered something under his breath and allowed his friends to pull him away. Isaac waited until they had disappeared around the corner before sitting back down. His heart was pounding, though his breathing remained even. Violence had been close, and he was grateful it had not come to that. The woman had not moved during the entire encounter, but now she did something that made Isaac's breath catch. She turned her head and looked directly at him for the first time. Her green eyes held his for several long seconds, and in that gaze he saw gratitude, warmth, and something else he could not quite name. Then she reached out and briefly touched his hand where it rested on his knee, the contact lasting only a moment before she turned back to watch the street. That simple touch sent warmth flooding through Isaac's chest. It was acknowledgement, thanks, and connection all at once, more powerful than any words could have been. From that day forward, Isaac made the journey to Rock Springs twice a week. It was far more often than necessary for trading or supplies, and the trip took the better part of a day each way, but he did not care. Each time he came to town, he would sit beside the woman on the bench, and they would share their silence together. The townspeople began to notice. Isaac would overhear whispers and speculation as he moved through the town conducting his business. "That mountain man is courting the mute woman," one merchant's wife said to another as Isaac passed. "How can he court her if she does not speak?" Her companion replied. "It is strange, if you ask me." "Maybe he likes the quiet," the first woman suggested. "Lord knows most men could use more of it." Isaac learned the woman's name from the proprietor of the boarding house where she rented a small room. Catherine Foster had arrived in Rock Springs on the stagecoach 3 months earlier, coming from somewhere back east, though no one knew exactly where. She had papers indicating she was 23 years old and unmarried. She paid her rent on time with money from a small inheritance, but no one knew how long that money would last. "She has not spoken a word since she arrived," Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house keeper, told Isaac. "Not a single word. At first I thought maybe she was simple-minded, but that is not it. There is intelligence in her eyes. She understands everything that is said to her, and she communicates with nods and shakes of her head when absolutely necessary. But speak, never." "Why did she come here?" Isaac asked. Mrs. Henderson shrugged. "No one knows. She had a letter of introduction from a banker in Philadelphia, enough to establish her credit as a decent person, but no explanation for why a young woman would travel all the way to Wyoming territory alone. Some say she is running from something. Others think maybe she witnessed something terrible that stole her voice. Myself, I think she just prefers silence. Is that so wrong?" Isaac thought it was perhaps the least wrong thing he had ever encountered. As the summer weeks passed, Isaac and Catherine developed their own language of gestures and glances. He learned that she spent her mornings tending a small garden behind the boarding house and her afternoons on the bench. She would bring wildflowers, arranging and rearranging them in her basket with careful attention. Sometimes she would draw in a small notebook, simple sketches of birds or buildings or the mountains in the distance. One day Isaac brought her a gift, a smooth river stone he had found, perfectly round and white as fresh snow. He said nothing as he placed it beside her on the bench. She picked it up, examining it with careful attention, then smiled at him. It was the first time he had seen her smile, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. After that, he brought her small gifts each time he visited. A feather from a red-tailed hawk, a piece of quartz that caught the sunlight, a wooden carving of a deer he had made during the long evenings in his cabin. She accepted each gift with that same radiant smile, carefully placing them in her basket to carry home. Isaac found himself talking to her, even though she never responded with words. He would tell her about his life in the mountains, describing the changing seasons and the animals he encountered. He spoke of his past, his childhood in Missouri, how he had come west after the war seeking peace and solitude. He had lost too many friends in that terrible conflict, heard too many screams and seen too much death. The mountains had offered healing in their silence. "I reckon that is why I understand you," he said one afternoon as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Sometimes words just cannot carry the weight of what is inside us. Sometimes silence is the only honest response to life. Catherine turned to look at him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. She reached out and took his hand, not briefly this time, but holding it firmly in both of hers. They sat like that until the stars began to appear, hands joined, hearts beginning to intertwine. The owner of the general store, Mr. Pritchard, approached Isaac one day as he was purchasing supplies. "That woman you have been sitting with," he said carefully. "Miss Foster. I thought you should know that folks are starting to talk." "Folks always talk," Isaac replied, his voice neutral. "True enough," Mr. Pritchard agreed. "But I wanted you to know that her money is running low. Mrs. Henderson mentioned she will not be able to pay rent much longer. There are not many options for a woman here, especially one who will not speak. Some have suggested she should move on to a larger city, maybe Salt Lake or Denver, where there might be more resources for someone like her." Isaac felt something twist in his chest at the thought of Catherine leaving. "What would you suggest?" he asked. Mr. Pritchard studied him for a moment. "Well, if a man was courting her proper like, that might solve the problem. A woman with a husband has a place in this world. But I do not know how a man courts a woman who will not speak, nor how he would know if his suit was welcome." Isaac purchased his supplies and left, but Mr. Pritchard's words stayed with him. He realized with startling clarity that he did not want Catherine to leave Rock Springs. More than that, he wanted her in his life permanently. But how did one propose marriage to a woman who did not speak? How could he know if she felt the same pull he did, the same rightness when they sat together in silence? The next time he came to town, Isaac brought his best horse instead of his pack mule. After sitting with Catherine for a while, he stood and gestured toward the animal. She looked at him with curiosity in her eyes. He offered his hand to help her up, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Isaac helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at first at the close contact, but as he kept his arms respectfully on either side of her, holding the reins, she gradually relaxed. He guided the horse out of town, heading toward the foothills. They rode for over an hour, climbing higher into the mountains along a trail Isaac knew well. Catherine remained silent, but he felt her wonder as they moved through groves of aspen and pine, past streams that tumbled over rocks, through meadows filled with wildflowers. Finally, they emerged into a clearing that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below, with Rock Springs looking like a collection of toy buildings in the distance. Isaac dismounted and helped Catherine down. He spread his coat on the ground for her to sit on, and they watched the world spread out below them. The silence here was different from the silence in town. Here there were no watching eyes, no curious whispers. Here they could simply be themselves, two souls seeking peace in a chaotic world. After a long while, Isaac began to speak. His voice was low and thoughtful. "I have been alone for a long time," he said. 8 years in these mountains, and I thought that was what I wanted, peace and quiet away from people and their constant noise. But then I saw you, and I realized there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonely, Catherine. I just did not know it until I met you." He paused, gathering his courage for what came next. "I know we have not known each other long. I know we are about as unusual a couple as this town has ever seen. But I need you to know that when I sit beside you, I feel more at home than I ever have anywhere else. Your silence is not something to be fixed or pitied. It is beautiful, and you are beautiful." Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a silver band he had traded for years ago, meant for a sister who had died of fever before he could give it to her. "I am not good with words, despite how much I have been talking lately. I am better with actions. So I want to show you something." He held the ring where she could see it, then looked into her eyes. "If you will have me, Catherine Foster, I would be honored to be your husband. I have a cabin in the mountains, small but sturdy. I can provide for you. I will protect you. And I will never, ever expect you to speak if you do not wish to. Your silence is enough for me. You are enough for me." Catherine's eyes widened and tears began to stream down her face. For a long moment she said nothing, did nothing, and Isaac felt his heart begin to sink. He had misread everything. She did not feel the same way. He had ruined the peaceful connection they shared by asking for more. But then Catherine did something that shocked him to his core. She opened her mouth, and in a voice rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper, she spoke. "Yes." That single word, the first Isaac had ever heard from her lips, hit him with the force of a lightning strike. She had broken her silence for him. She had given him something she gave no one else. "You spoke," he said, wonder filling his voice. Catherine nodded, tears still flowing. Then she spoke again, each word coming with visible effort, as if she were pulling them from somewhere deep inside herself. "I can speak. I choose not to, but for you, I will choose differently." Her voice was soft and melodic, beautiful in its hesitant honesty. Isaac reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you stop speaking?" Catherine took a shaky breath. "My father was a judge in Philadelphia, important man, loud man, After my mother died, he arranged for me to marry his business partner, a man twice my age who liked to hear himself talk. I objected. I said no again and again, but my words meant nothing. I was told to be quiet, to do as I was told, so I stopped speaking entirely. If my words had no power, I would give no words at all. What happened? Isaac asked gently. The wedding day came. I stood at the altar in complete silence, refused to say the vows. The minister could not complete the ceremony without my consent. My father was furious. He tried to force me, but I would not break. Finally, the man I was supposed to marry called it off. Said he did not want a defective wife. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if remembering her power. My father disowned me. I took what little money my mother had left me and came west as far as I could go. I thought if I went somewhere no one knew me, somewhere no one expected anything from me, I could find peace. Did you? Isaac asked. Catherine looked at him, and a small smile touched her lips. Not until you sat beside me. Not until someone saw my silence and did not try to fix it. You gave me the choice, Isaac. That is why I will choose to speak to you. Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he did what he had been longing to do for weeks. He leaned forward and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Will you come with me now? Isaac asked. To my cabin. We can be married as soon as we get back to town. Catherine shook her head. I need to collect my things, say goodbye to Mrs. Henderson, do this properly. Isaac nodded, respecting her need for closure. Tomorrow, then. I will come for you tomorrow. They rode back to Rock Springs as the sun set, and this time Catherine leaned back against Isaac's chest, comfortable and trusting. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down, and she surprised him by reaching up to touch his bearded cheek. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me. Isaac watched her go inside, then rode to the small hotel where he sometimes stayed when in town. He slept fitfully that night, half afraid he had dreamed the entire afternoon, that he would wake to find Catherine still silent and unreachable. But the next morning, when he arrived at the boarding house, Catherine was waiting on the porch with a single trunk containing her possessions. She wore a simple blue dress, and her hair was arranged in a more elaborate style than usual. Mrs. Henderson stood beside her, wiping tears from her eyes. You take good care of her, Mr. Norwood, the boarding house keeper said firmly. She is special, this one. I know, Isaac replied. I will guard her with my life. They were married that afternoon by the circuit judge who happened to be passing through Rock Springs. The ceremony was held in the church, with Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Pritchard, and a handful of other townspeople as witnesses. When the judge asked Catherine to repeat her vows, she spoke them clearly, her voice growing stronger with each word. Isaac's vows were simple and heartfelt. I promise to honor your silence and your voice, whichever you choose. I promise to stand beside you and protect you. I promise to love you all my days. The judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Isaac kissed his bride before God and witnesses, feeling as though his heart might burst from happiness. They left Rock Springs that evening, Catherine riding beside Isaac on his horse, her trunk secured to a pack mule. The journey to his cabin took several hours, winding higher into the mountains as darkness fell. When they finally arrived, Isaac lit lamps to show Catherine her new home. The cabin was indeed small, just one large room with a sleeping loft above, but it was well built and cozy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows looked out onto a meadow where deer often grazed at dawn. The furniture was simple but well made, most of it crafted by Isaac's own hands. It is not much, Isaac said, suddenly seeing the rough simplicity through her eyes and feeling self-conscious. But it is sturdy and warm. I can add on, build you a separate room for cooking, maybe a porch where you can sit." Catherine walked slowly around the space, running her fingers over the wooden table, examining the neat stack of furs in the corner, looking at the books on the shelf above the fireplace. Then she turned to Isaac and spoke. "It is perfect," she said simply. "It is quiet." That night, they consummated their marriage in the loft above, learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. Catherine spoke very little, but her sighs and touches communicated more than words ever could. Isaac was careful and patient, and when she finally cried out in pleasure, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Afterward, they lay tangled together under thick quilts, Catherine's head resting on Isaac's broad chest. His arms encircled her protectively, and she traced patterns on his skin with her fingertips. "Will you tell me about your life?" she asked softly. "Everything. I want to know the man I married." So Isaac talked, his deep voice rumbling in his chest as he told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, joining the army at 18, fighting in battles that still haunted his dreams. He spoke of his return home to find his parents dead of illness and his sister not long behind them. He described his decision to head west, seeking something he could not name, until he found these mountains and felt peace for the first time since childhood. "I have not been with many women," he admitted. "I am not smooth with words or manners, but I will be faithful to you, Catherine. I will work hard to provide for you, and I will never take your voice for granted, whether you choose to use it or not." Catherine lifted her head to look at him. "I never thought I would marry," she said. "I thought I had left that possibility behind in Philadelphia. But you are not like the men I knew there. You do not try to fill every silence with noise. You do not need me to be anything other than what I am." "What are you?" Isaac asked, curious to hear how she saw herself. Catherine considered the question. "I am someone who feels too deeply for words. Someone who found that silence was more honest than the lies everyone wanted me to speak. But with you, I do not have to choose between silence and lies. I can speak truth or I can be quiet, and both are welcome." "Both are welcome," Isaac confirmed. "Always." They fell asleep in each other's arms as a gentle rain began to fall on the cabin roof, a soothing rhythm that matched their breathing. The next weeks were a revelation for both of them. Catherine adapted to life in the mountains with surprising ease. She took over the garden plot Isaac had started, expanding it and coaxing vegetables to grow in the rocky soil. She proved to be an excellent cook, transforming Isaac's simple provisions into meals that made his eyes widen with pleasure. She mended his clothes and made curtains for the windows, bringing touches of softness to the rough cabin. But what surprised Isaac most was that Catherine often chose silence, even with him. Whole days would pass where she spoke no more than a dozen words, communicating instead with smiles and touches, with the meals she prepared and the way she would lean against him in the evenings as they watched the sunset from the new porch he was building. He came to understand that her silence was not a rejection but a different form of intimacy. When she did speak, her words carried weight because they were not wasted on meaningless chatter. When she said, "I love you," for the first time, about a month after their wedding, Isaac felt those 3 words resonate in his bones. The changing seasons brought new rhythms to their life. As summer faded into autumn, Isaac taught Catherine how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead. She learned to recognize the tracks of various animals and how to move quietly through the forest. Sometimes she would accompany him when he checked his trap lines, and he marveled at how she seemed to blend into the wilderness, as much a part of it as the deer and elk. One crisp October morning, they were walking back to the cabin after checking snares when they heard shouting in the distance. Isaac tensed immediately, moving protectively in front of Catherine. The shouting grew louder, and soon a man stumbled into view on the trail ahead. He was young, perhaps 20, and in bad shape. His shirt was torn and bloody, and he was limping badly. When he saw Isaac and Catherine, relief flooded his face. "Please," he gasped. "You have to help me. My brother and I were prospecting up in the high country. There was a cave-in. He is trapped. I cannot get him out alone." Isaac did not hesitate. "Show me." He turned to Catherine. "Go back to the cabin. Get bandages ready and heat water. If we get his brother out, he will likely need tending." Catherine nodded and immediately turned back toward home, moving quickly but surely along the trail. Isaac followed the injured man, whose name was Thomas, higher into the mountains. The story came out in gasps as they climbed. Thomas and his brother Martin had been digging in an old mine shaft, looking for silver, when part of the ceiling collapsed. Martin was pinned under rocks and timber, still alive but unable to free himself. It took them nearly an hour to reach the site. Isaac could hear Martin's weak calls for help from inside the partially collapsed tunnel entrance. He assessed the situation with the calm practicality of a man used to solving problems in the wilderness. "We need to shore up the entrance before we can dig him out," Isaac said. "Otherwise, the whole thing might come down on all of us." Working with fallen timber from the surrounding forest, Isaac constructed a rough frame to support the tunnel entrance. His muscles strained as he lifted heavy logs into place, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool mountain air. Thomas helped as best he could with his injured leg, but it was primarily Isaac's strength that made the rescue possible. Once the entrance was secure, Isaac carefully moved rocks and debris, creating a path to where Martin lay trapped. The younger man was pale and in obvious pain, but alive. A large timber had fallen across his legs and smaller rocks pinned him in place. "This is going to hurt," Isaac warned, "but I need to lift this timber while Thomas pulls you out." Martin nodded, gritting his teeth. Isaac positioned himself, got a firm grip on the timber, and lifted with all his considerable strength. The wood rose inches, then a foot, giving Thomas just enough room to drag his brother free. As soon as Martin was clear, Isaac let the timber drop, breathing hard from the effort. Martin's legs were badly bruised and one ankle appeared to be broken, but he was free. Isaac fashioned a rough splint from branches and strips torn from his own shirt, then helped Thomas get Martin onto his back. The journey back to the cabin was long and difficult, with Isaac bearing most of Martin's weight while Thomas limped alongside. Catherine had everything ready when they arrived. She had transformed the cabin into a makeshift hospital, with clean bandages laid out, water boiling on the stove, and the table cleared for examination. Her eyes widened when she saw the injured men, but she immediately set to work without a word. Isaac watched with admiration as Catherine cleaned and bandaged wounds with capable efficiency. She had not spoken a single word since the men arrived, but she communicated everything needed through gestures and expressions. She indicated where Isaac should lay Martin, pointed to supplies when she needed them, and gently touched Thomas's arm to guide him to a chair when he swayed with exhaustion. "Your wife," Thomas said to Isaac, his voice filled with wonder. "She does not speak, but she sure knows what she is doing." "She speaks when words are needed," Isaac replied. "Right now, actions matter more." They kept the brothers at the cabin for 3 days while Martin's wounds began to heal and his fever broke. Catherine tended them with silent dedication, and Isaac hunted to provide fresh meat for everyone. On the 3rd evening, as they all sat around the fireplace, Martin finally felt strong enough to express his gratitude. "We owe you our lives," he said, looking at Isaac and Catherine. "Both of us. If you had not helped, I would have died in that tunnel, and Thomas probably would have died trying to save me. How can we ever repay you?" "No repayment needed," Isaac said. We help each other out here. That is how people survive in this country. Still, Thomas insisted. If you ever need anything, you just call on us. We have a claim down near Rock Springs. Once Martin heals up, we will be working it again. Anything you need, we are there. Catherine brought them each a cup of coffee, then surprised everyone by speaking. Just be more careful, she said softly. Life is precious. Do not throw it away chasing silver. The brothers stared at her, shocked to hear her voice. Then Martin smiled. Yes, madam, we will be more careful. I promise you that. When the brothers finally left, able to make the journey back to civilization with Isaac's help, the cabin seemed very quiet. Catherine and Isaac stood on the new porch, watching the men disappear down the trail. You were magnificent, Isaac said, putting his arm around Catherine's shoulders. The way you cared for them, knew exactly what to do. Where did you learn all that? My mother, Catherine replied. Before she died, she taught me healing. Said every woman should know how to tend wounds and illness. I never thought I would use those skills like this, but I am glad I had them. So am I. Isaac pulled her closer. You amaze me every day, Catherine Norwood. She turned in his arms and kissed him, and he tasted coffee and sweetness on her lips. We make a good team, she said when they broke apart. You with your strength, me with my quietness. We balance each other. We do, Isaac agreed. We truly do. As winter approached, Isaac worked hard to ensure they had everything needed for the months of snow ahead. He hunted deer and elk, smoking and preserving the meat. He cut enough firewood to last through the coldest months, stacking it under a shelter next to the cabin. Catherine filled the root cellar with vegetables from her garden and preserves she had made from wild berries. They were ready when the first serious snowfall came in early November. Isaac woke one morning to find the world transformed, white and pristine and impossibly quiet. He looked down from the loft to see Catherine already awake, standing at the window and watching the snow fall with a look of wonder on her face. He climbed down and wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together in silence, watching the peaceful descent of snowflakes. No words were needed. The moment was perfect as it was. Winter in the mountains was harsh but beautiful. Some days the snow fell so thick that they could not see beyond the porch. Other days dawned clear and bright, the sun glinting off snow so white it hurt to look at. They settled into comfortable rhythms, their days filled with the small tasks necessary for survival and the larger task of learning to be married. Catherine continued to choose silence more often than not, but Isaac came to read her moods and thoughts through other signs. The way she hummed softly while cooking meant she was content. The way she stood at the window staring out at the mountains meant she was thinking deeply about something. The way she would seek his hand and hold it tight meant she needed reassurance or comfort. In turn, she learned to read him. She knew when his nightmares troubled him, seeing it in the shadows under his eyes even when he said nothing. She understood that when he spent extra time working with wood or leather, crafting things with his hands, he was processing some problem or worry. She recognized the subtle signs that told her when he needed closeness and when he needed space. On Christmas Eve, a blizzard raged outside while they stayed warm by the fire. Isaac had fashioned a small wooden box for Catherine, carving delicate flowers into the lid. He presented it to her shyly, uncertain if his rough handiwork would please her. Catherine opened the box to find it lined with soft leather. Inside lay the small treasures Isaac had given her during their courtship: the white river stone, the hawk feather, the piece of quartz, and all the rest. She had kept everyone, and seeing them gathered together made tears well in her eyes. I thought you might like a special place to keep them, Isaac said. Something better than your basket. Catherine set the box aside carefully, then reached behind the chair where she had hidden her own gift. It was a shirt she had sewn for him from soft buckskin, with intricate beadwork across the shoulders in patterns of mountains and trees. The work must have taken her months, hours stolen when he was out hunting or checking traps. Isaac ran his fingers over the beadwork, marveling at the detail. "This is incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have never owned anything so fine." "You deserve fine things," Catherine said softly. "You deserve beauty in your life." Isaac pulled the shirt on over his head and it fit perfectly. Catherine had measured him somehow without his knowledge, perhaps while he slept. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, trying to convey through touch what words could not express. That night, they made love with special tenderness, their bodies speaking a language all their own. Afterward, as Catherine drifted off to sleep in his arms, Isaac stared at the ceiling and marveled at how completely his life had changed. A year ago he had been alone, convinced he needed no one. Now he could not imagine existence without the woman breathing softly against his chest. January brought the worst of winter, with temperatures that plunged far below zero and winds that howled like wolves around the cabin. They stayed inside for days at a time, venturing out only when absolutely necessary to tend the animals in the small shelter Isaac had built or to gather firewood. During these long days trapped indoors, Catherine began to tell Isaac more about her past. She spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, the grand house where she had lived, the society parties her mother had hosted. She described her mother's slow decline from illness and her father's transformation from a loving parent to a bitter, controlling man. "He blamed me," she said one afternoon as they sat by the fire. "For her death, I mean. She died in childbirth when I was 12, trying to give him the son he always wanted. The baby died too. After that, he could barely look at me. I reminded him too much of what he had lost." Isaac held her hand, listening without interruption. Catherine's voice was steady, but he could hear the old pain underneath her words. "He tried to marry me off as soon as I turned 18, said it was his duty to see me settled. But I think really he just wanted me out of his house, out of his sight. The first suitor was a banker's son who drank too much. I refused. Then came a lawyer who beat his servants. I refused him too. Finally, my father's business partner offered. Father was thrilled. A successful match, he called it. He did not care that the man was 50 years old and had buried 2 wives already. He did not care that I begged him not to force me." "So you stopped speaking," Isaac said. Catherine nodded. "It was the only power I had, the only way I could say no that he could not ignore or talk over. And it worked after a fashion. I saved myself from that marriage, but I lost everything else." "Did you ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Giving up that life, that comfort, coming all the way out here with nothing?" Catherine looked at him, and her smile was radiant. "Not for a single moment. Especially not now. Here I am free. I can choose silence or speech. I can choose how to spend my days. I chose you, Isaac, and that was the best choice I have ever made." Isaac kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I am the one who is lucky," he said. "You could have had anyone. Why did you choose a rough mountain man who talks to himself and lives miles from anywhere?" "Because you saw me," Catherine replied simply. "Not what you wanted me to be, not what society said I should be. You saw me exactly as I was and loved me for it. How could I not choose that?" As winter slowly released its grip and signs of spring began to appear, Catherine noticed changes in her body. Her monthly courses stopped, and she felt tired in the mornings. She recognized the signs, having helped her mother through pregnancies that had ended in miscarriage, and both joy and fear filled her heart. She waited to tell Isaac until she was certain, and then she chose a perfect moment. They were sitting on the porch in the weak sunshine of early March, watching the first brave robins return from the south. Catherine took Isaac's large hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby," she said softly. "Your child, growing inside me." Isaac's eyes went wide, and a dozen emotions crossed his face in rapid succession. Wonder, joy, fear, determination. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure. The baby will come in the fall, probably October." Isaac gathered her carefully into his arms as if she had suddenly become fragile as glass. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Catherine, I promise you I will keep both of you safe. I will be the best father I can be. I will." Catherine put her finger to his lips, stopping his flow of words. "I know," she said. "I have always known. You are a good man, Isaac Norwood. You will be a wonderful father." The news of the baby changed everything and nothing. Isaac became even more protective, insisting on doing the heavier chores himself and worrying whenever Catherine looked tired. But their daily rhythms continued much as before, the comfortable silence between them now filled with shared anticipation. As Catherine's belly began to swell with new life, Isaac started a project. In the evenings after dinner, he would work on carving a cradle from pine wood he had carefully selected and dried. His large hands, so strong and capable with axe and knife, proved equally skilled at delicate detail work. He carved animals into the headboard: deer and elk, bear and fox, all the creatures that shared their mountain home. Catherine would sit nearby, sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric she had traded for in Rock Springs during one of their now infrequent trips to town. They worked in companionable silence most evenings, occasionally sharing a smile or a touch, but finding no need for constant conversation. Summer brought warmth back to the mountains and an abundance of life. Catherine's garden flourished, and she spent hours tending it, talking softly to the plants. Isaac would watch from where he worked, splitting wood or mending fence, and his heart would swell with love for this woman who had brought such light into his life. In late July, they had unexpected visitors. Thomas and Martin, the brothers Isaac had rescued, appeared on the trail leading 2 horses loaded with supplies. Both looked healthy and prosperous, their clothes new and their horses well fed. "We struck it," Thomas announced with a huge grin. "Hit a vein of silver that just keeps going. We are rich, or going to be once it is all dug out." "That is wonderful news," Isaac said, shaking their hands. "I am happy for you both." Martin noticed Catherine's obvious pregnancy and smiled. "Looks like you have been blessed too. Congratulations." They invited the brothers to stay for dinner, and Catherine prepared a feast from their stores and fresh vegetables. The brothers regaled them with stories of their mining operation, the assayer who had confirmed their strike, and their plans to expand. "We want to repay you," Martin said seriously as the meal wound down, "for saving my life. We have been talking about it all year, trying to figure out what would be adequate. Then we realized you are going to have a baby. Babies need things, so we brought supplies." They went outside and began unloading the pack horses. There were blankets and cloth, jars of preserved fruits, bags of flour and sugar, even a small music box that played a tinkling lullaby. The pile of gifts was staggering. "This is too much," Isaac protested, but the brothers would not hear of it. "It is not enough," Thomas insisted. "You gave me back my brother. How do you put a price on that?" Catherine, who had been silent throughout the visit, stepped forward. "Thank you," she said clearly, her voice carrying in the mountain air, "for your generosity and your kindness. Our child will benefit from your gifts, and we will tell him or her about the good men who gave them." The brothers left the next morning, heading back to their claim and their new life. Isaac and Catherine stood together, looking at the pile of supplies now carefully stored in the cabin. People can surprise you, Catherine said. I learned to distrust most people back east, learned to see selfishness and cruelty everywhere. But out here, there is still genuine goodness. People who help each other simply because it is right. There is good and bad everywhere, Isaac replied. But I think the mountains have a way of bringing out the best in people. If they survive here, they have to learn cooperation and kindness. The wilderness does not care about your wealth or status. It treats everyone the same. As summer faded into autumn, Catherine grew large with child. She moved more slowly now, and Isaac took over most of the physical work around the homestead. He hunted and hauled water, tended the garden and chopped wood. Catherine focused on preparing for the baby, washing and rewashing the tiny clothes, organizing the supplies, arranging and rearranging the beautiful cradle that now sat ready beside their bed. In early October, Catherine woke Isaac in the middle of the night with a hand on his shoulder. "The baby is coming," she said calmly. "The pain started about an hour ago." Isaac bolted upright, instantly awake and terrified. They were miles from any town, from any doctor or midwife. He knew that women died in childbirth, had lost his own mother to it. Fear gripped his heart like a vice. Catherine saw his panic and took his face in her hands. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "I need you to be calm. I need you to be strong. I know what to do, but I need your help." "Can you do that for me?" Isaac took a deep breath and nodded. "Tell me what you need." Catherine walked him through the preparations. Boil water. Lay out clean linens and towels. Gather the supplies she had set aside. His hands shook as he worked, but he did everything she asked. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Isaac had faced danger many times in his life battles, wild animals, harsh weather, but nothing had ever frightened him as much as watching Catherine struggle to bring their child into the world. She was incredibly brave, working through each contraction with grim determination, occasionally crying out but never losing her focus. "I can see the head," Isaac said, positioned where Catherine had instructed him. "Catherine, I can see our baby. Pull gently when I push," she gasped. "Help the baby out." With the next contraction, Isaac carefully helped ease their child into the world. It was a boy, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. Isaac held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as the baby took his first breaths of mountain air. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Catherine, we have a son." He placed the baby on Catherine's chest and she wrapped her arms around the tiny body. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Isaac tended to Catherine, following her instructions to deliver the afterbirth and clean her up. She was exhausted but glowing, cradling their son as he nuzzled against her, already seeking to nurse. "What should we name him?" Isaac asked, sitting beside them on the bed and gently touching his son's downy head. Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she smiled. "James," she said. "After my mother's father, the only man in my family who ever truly listened to me, James Isaac Norwood." "James," Isaac repeated, testing the name. "I like it, James Norwood. Our son." They spent the rest of that day in bed together, the three of them, learning to be a family. James nursed and slept, and Isaac and Catherine watched him with endless fascination. Every tiny movement, every small sound he made seemed like a miracle. "I was so afraid," Isaac admitted as evening fell. "When you were in labor, I thought I might lose you. I do not know how I would survive that, Catherine. You and James, you are my whole world now." "I was afraid too," Catherine confessed. "But I also knew I would fight with everything in me to stay with you, to be here for our son. Love is worth fighting for, Isaac. You taught me that." The first weeks with a newborn were challenging but joyful. James was a good baby, fussy only when hungry or wet. Catherine recovered her strength quickly, and soon she was moving around the cabin with ease, tending to their son and resuming her household duties. Isaac was completely besotted with his son. He would hold the baby for hours, talking to him in a low, gentle voice, telling him stories about the mountains and the animals that lived there. He carved toys for James, a simple rattle, a wooden horse, and hung them above the cradle. Catherine often watched father and son together, and her heart would swell with love. She had never imagined this life, had not dreamed that such happiness was possible. The silence she had chosen as protection had led her to this place, to this man, to this family. Every hard thing she had endured had been worth it to arrive here. As winter settled in once more, they adapted to life as a family of three. The cabin that had seemed cozy for two was now filled with the sounds of a baby crying, cooing, the soft gurgles of contentment. Catherine sang lullabies to James, her voice soft and sweet, and Isaac would stop whatever he was doing to listen, treasured these moments when she chose to fill the silence with song on Christmas Eve. With James nearly 3 months old, they sat by the fire as they had the year before. James was asleep in his cradle and Catherine was nestled against Isaac's side. "You remember this time last year?" Isaac asked softly. "Our first Christmas together." "I remember everything," Catherine replied. "I remember being so happy, thinking life could not get any better. I was wrong. This is better. This is everything I never knew I wanted." "I want to give you more," Isaac said. "More children if you are willing, a bigger house, maybe down closer to Rock Springs so you have neighbors. I want to give you everything." Catherine turned to look at him. "I do not need more things, Isaac, but more children, yes, I would like that. And a bigger house eventually would be nice, especially if we have more babies. But we do not need neighbors. I do not need other people. I need you and James and this quiet life we have built. That is enough." "That is more than enough." Isaac kissed her softly. "Then that is what you will have. Always." Spring came again, and with it new life in the mountains. James was 6 months old now, a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everything and was beginning to babble. Catherine would take him outside, pointing out birds and flowers, naming everything for him even though he could not yet understand. Isaac expanded the garden, building a larger, fenced area to keep out deer and rabbits. He also began work on an addition to the cabin, a second room that would give them more space as their family grew. The work was slow, done in spare moments between other necessary tasks, but Isaac was patient and thorough. In May, they made their first trip to Rock Springs since before James was born. The townspeople flocked around them, wanting to see the baby and congratulate the couple. Mrs. Henderson cried when she held James, declaring him the most beautiful baby she had ever seen. "Look at you," the boarding house keeper said to Catherine. "Motherhood suits you. You are positively glowing." "I am happy," Catherine said simply, and those 3 words seemed to say everything. They were preparing to leave town when a well-dressed stranger approached them. He was perhaps 40 years old, with graying hair and an air of authority. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Are you Catherine Norwood, formerly Catherine Foster of Philadelphia?" Catherine stiffened, and Isaac immediately moved closer to her, protective. "Who is asking?" he said, his voice hard. "My name is Richard Carmichael. I am a lawyer from Philadelphia. I have been searching for Miss Foster, Mrs. Norwood, I should say, for several months now. I have news regarding her father." Catherine's face went pale. "My father disowned me. I want nothing from him." "Yes, I am aware of the circumstances of your departure," Carmichael said gently. "But I am afraid I must inform you that your father passed away 3 months ago. Heart failure. Before he died, he made a new will, reinstating you as his heir. Mrs. Norwood, you have inherited a considerable estate." Catherine stared at him in shock. Isaac put his arm around her shoulders, steadying her. "How much?" he asked bluntly. "The estate is valued at approximately $200,000, Carmichael said. "Properties, investments, and cash. Your father left a letter for you as well. He wanted me to convey his deepest regrets for how he treated you. He said that losing you had taught him the difference between controlling someone and loving them, but he learned it too late." Catherine took the letter with shaking hands but did not open it. "I need time," she said. "This is a lot to absorb." "Of course," Carmichael said. "I am staying at the hotel for the next few days. When you are ready to discuss the details, I will be available. Mrs. Norwood, I know this is unexpected, but your father's final wish was for you to be provided for. He may not have shown it well in life, but he did love you." They returned to the cabin in silence, James asleep in Catherine's arms. Isaac could see his wife processing the news, her face cycling through a dozen different emotions. When they finally arrived home, Catherine handed James to Isaac and walked out to the meadow behind the cabin. Isaac watched her go, giving her space to think. He took James inside, changed him, and put him down for a nap. Then he went to find Catherine. She was sitting in the tall grass, staring at the mountains, the unopened letter in her hands. Isaac sat beside her and waited. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I thought I had left that life behind forever," she said. "I thought I had burned those bridges completely, and I was fine with that. I chose this life, this place, I have never regretted it." "But," Isaac prompted gently, "but now he is gone, and I never got to tell him that I was happy. That my choice to leave, to be silent, to come here, it was the right choice. I wanted him to know that he did not ruin me. He set me free, even if he did not mean to." "Open the letter," Isaac suggested. "Maybe he knew." Catherine's hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Her father's handwriting was shaky, written by a sick man. She read aloud, her voice soft. "My dearest Catherine, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I pray you have found it in your heart to forgive me. I was a fool, blinded by grief and pride. I tried to control you because I could not control my own pain after losing your mother. When you refused to speak, to bend to my will, I saw it as defiance. It took losing you completely to understand that it was strength. You were strong enough to say no in the only way I could not ignore. I hope you have found happiness, wherever you are. I hope you have found someone who sees your silence not as a defect, but as the powerful choice it is. I leave you my estate not because I think money can fix what I broke, but because it is all I have left to give. Use it to build whatever life you wish. Be happy, my dear girl. That is all I ever should have wanted for you. With deepest regret and enduring love, your father." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she finished reading. Isaac pulled her into his arms, and she cried against his chest, mourning the father she had lost long before his death, grieving the relationship they never got to repair. "He understood in the end," Isaac said softly. "He saw what I saw, that your silence was power, not weakness. That takes wisdom, Catherine. Not many men could admit they were wrong like that." "I forgive him," Catherine whispered. "I do not think I realized I was still angry until just now, until I could let it go. I forgive him, Isaac." They sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about what this inheritance meant for their future. Catherine made her decision quickly and firmly. "I do not want to leave the mountains," she said. "This is our home, but we could use some of the money to make life easier. A bigger house, maybe, with room for more children. We could help people like Thomas and Martin helped us. We could make a difference." "We could," Isaac agreed. "But Catherine, that money is yours. Your father left it to you. You decide what to do with it." "It is ours," Catherine corrected. "Everything I have is yours, and everything you have is mine. We are a family. We decide together. They spent the next few days meeting with Mr. Carmichael, working through the legal details of the inheritance. Catherine arranged for most of the money to remain invested back east, generating steady income. But she had a portion transferred to a bank in Rock Springs, enough to fund their plans. Over the next 2 years, their lives changed in wonderful ways. Isaac built a new house, larger and more comfortable than the original cabin, with separate bedrooms for children, a proper kitchen for Catherine, and even a small room that became her refuge when she needed solitude and silence. The original cabin became a workshop for Isaac and a storage building. They had a second child in the spring of 1878, a daughter they named Emma, after Isaac's mother. She had Catherine's green eyes and Isaac's dark hair, and her brothers doted on her from the moment she arrived. James, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Catherine remained selective about when she spoke, often going days with only a few words exchanged with Isaac, but she talked freely with their children. She wanted them to hear her voice, to know that her silence was a choice, not an inability. She taught them that sometimes quiet was better than noise, but that words had power when used with intention. Isaac continued to trap and hunt, but he also began breeding horses, using part of Catherine's inheritance to purchase good stock. The venture proved successful, and soon people were coming from Rock Springs and beyond to buy horses from the mountain man who raised the smartest, toughest animals in the territory. They used their wealth quietly, never flaunting it, but helping where they could. When the church in Rock Springs needed a new roof, an anonymous donation appeared. When a family lost their home to fire, they found supplies and money left on their doorstep. Isaac and Catherine never took credit, finding more satisfaction in helping than in recognition. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Catherine back to the meadow where he had proposed. Their children were with Mrs. Henderson in town for the night, giving the couple rare time alone. "You remember this place?" Isaac asked as they sat in the grass, now taller and more lush than it had been years ago. "I remember everything about that day," Catherine said. "The way my heart pounded when I saw the ring, the way I thought I might burst from wanting to say yes, the way it felt to finally speak after so many months of silence." "You ever regret speaking?" Isaac asked. "Breaking your silence. Sometimes I worry that I took something from you, that choice to be quiet." Catherine turned to him, cupping his bearded face in her hands. "You did not take anything from me. You gave me the freedom to choose. I can be silent when I wish, and I can speak when I want. That choice, that power, is your gift to me. You saw me, Isaac. You saw me when no one else could. You loved my silence, but you also loved my voice. You loved all of me." "How could I ever regret that?" Isaac kissed her deeply, trying to convey through touch everything his words could not express. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I want to give you something," Catherine said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a ring, masculine and strong, made of silver with a simple design of mountains etched into the band. "I never gave you a wedding ring," she explained. "We married so quickly, and I did not have anything to give. But I had this made from silver that Thomas and Martin mined, in thanks for the life you gave me. It is not much, but I wanted you to have something, a symbol of what we are to each other." Isaac's eyes grew damp as she slipped the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. "It is everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Catherine, you are everything." They made love there in the meadow under the stars, their bodies speaking the language they had developed over years of marriage, a conversation of touch and breath, and shared pleasure that needed no words at all. More children came in the following years. Another son, Benjamin, born in 1880, strong and healthy with his father's build. And finally, in 1882, twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca, who kept everyone on their toes with their energy and mischief. The house that had seemed so large when first built now bustled with life and noise. Catherine, who had once chosen silence as protection, found herself surrounded by the cheerful chaos of children. She embraced it, singing to them, reading to them, telling them stories in her soft voice. But she still retreated sometimes to her quiet room, needing to reconnect with that essential part of herself, and her family understood and respected that need. Isaac taught his sons to hunt and trap, to respect the wilderness and live in harmony with it. He taught his daughters the same things, believing that all his children should know how to survive in the mountains. Catherine taught them all to read and write, to cook and sew, to tend wounds and illnesses. Together, they raised children who were strong, capable, and kind. On summer evenings, the family would gather on the large porch Isaac had built, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sometimes there would be conversation and laughter. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, connected by their shared peace. Rock Springs grew over the years, transitioning from a rough mining town to a more established community. Isaac and Catherine's reputation grew along with it. They were known as the quiet couple from the mountains, generous and private, raising a brood of well-mannered children. Stories circulated about Catherine's selective silence, about how she would go weeks without speaking to anyone in town but her family, yet could talk for hours if the subject interested her. "She is the one who never speaks," people would say, not quite accurately but close enough to truth. And he is the mountain man who loved her quiet and sat with her in silence. It became a sort of legend in Rock Springs, a story people told about the power of acceptance and unconventional love. Young women who felt pressured to be something they were not would hear about Catherine and feel hope. Men who struggled to understand their wives would hear about Isaac and learn that love sometimes means sitting in silence, bearing witness without trying to fix or change. In the spring of 1885, Catherine and Isaac celebrated 10 years of marriage. Their children ranged from 9-year-old James to the 3-year-old twins, and the house was always full of life. Isaac was 37 now, his hair beginning to show threads of silver, though his body remained strong and muscular from his work. Catherine was 32, more beautiful to Isaac than she had been at 23, maturity and motherhood having added depth to her features. They took a rare trip alone together, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson and another family friend, and rode up into the high country. They camped by a crystal-clear lake, cooked trout over an open fire, and spent 2 nights under the stars. On the second night, lying wrapped in blankets beside the fire, Catherine spoke about something that had been on her mind. "I want to help other women," she said. "Women who feel trapped, who feel like they have no voice. I have been thinking about this for a long time, Isaac. We have resources now. We could create a place, a refuge of sorts, for women who need a safe place to land." "Like what you needed when you ran from Philadelphia," Isaac said, understanding immediately. "Exactly like that. Not everyone can find their way to freedom like I did. Many do not have the money or the courage. But if there was a place they could come, somewhere safe where they could figure out their next steps, it might make all the difference." Isaac considered this carefully. "It would be a big undertaking. Where would you establish such a place?" "In Rock Springs," Catherine said. "There is a building near the church, currently empty. We could buy it, fix it up. I would not run it myself, I am not suited for that kind of public role, but we could fund it, find someone capable to manage it. Women could come and stay as long as needed, learn skills to support themselves, find their voices or their silence, whichever they required. "I think it is a wonderful idea," Isaac said. "Your father's money used to free other women from situations like the one he tried to force you into. There is a poetry to that." Over the next year, they made Catherine's vision a reality. They purchased the building and transformed it into a comfortable boarding house specifically for women in difficult circumstances. They hired a widow named Mrs. Dorothy Crane to run it, a practical woman with a kind heart and no tolerance for nonsense. The house could accommodate up to 8 women at a time, and word spread quickly about the refuge available in Rock Springs. Women came from all over the territory. Some were running from bad marriages or worse. Others were simply alone in the world, needing a safe place while they found their footing. The house asked no questions and demanded nothing except respectful behavior. Women could stay as long as needed, learning skills like sewing or bookkeeping that would allow them to support themselves. Catherine visited the house regularly, though she rarely spoke when there. She would sit with the women in comfortable silence, and somehow her presence was soothing. The women understood that she had been where they were, lost and searching, and had found her way to safety. If she could do it, perhaps they could too. The house became Catherine's legacy in Rock Springs, though few knew she was behind it. Only Mrs. Crane and a few trusted souls knew that the quiet woman from the mountains funded the entire operation. Catherine preferred it that way, helping without needing recognition or thanks. As their children grew older, Catherine began speaking more frequently, especially in public. She realized that her silence, which had once been necessary for survival and then a personal choice, could also be a barrier to the good she wanted to do in the world. She started attending town meetings, speaking up for improvements to the school and better support for families in need. Her voice, used sparingly but powerfully, carried weight because everyone knew she did not speak unless she had something important to say. Isaac watched his wife's evolution with pride and love. She had gone from the silent woman on the bench to a quiet force for good in their community, all while remaining true to herself. She still chose silence much of the time, especially at home where she felt most comfortable, but she no longer needed it as protection. It was simply part of who she was. In 1888, when James turned 12, he asked his parents about how they had met. They were sitting around the dinner table, the whole family together, and the question caught both Isaac and Catherine by surprise. "You never talk about it," James said. "How you met, why you got married. We hear stories in town, but I want to hear it from you." Isaac and Catherine exchanged a glance, a whole conversation happening in that look. Then Catherine smiled and began to speak, telling their children the story of the quiet woman and the mountain man who sat with her in silence. She explained about Philadelphia, about her father and the unwanted marriage, about her choice to stop speaking. "I came to Rock Springs looking for a place where no one would expect anything from me," she said. "I just wanted to be left alone with my silence. Then your father came along, and he did something no one else had done. He did not try to fix me or change me. He just sat beside me and accepted who I was. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Isaac picked up the story, describing how he had been drawn to Catherine's stillness, how he had understood her need for quiet because he shared it. "I fell in love with your mother before I ever heard her speak," he said. "I fell in love with who she was in the silence, with the peace she carried inside her. When she finally did speak, when she said yes to marrying me, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. But I would have loved her just the same if she had never spoken at all." The children listened with rapt attention, understanding their parents in a new way. Emma, now 10 years old, had tears in her eyes. "That is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," she said. Catherine laughed, the sound clear and joyful. "Romance is not always loud declarations and grand gestures," she told her daughter. "Sometimes it is sitting in silence with someone who understands your soul. Sometimes it is being seen exactly as you are and loved for it." As the years continued to pass, Isaac and Catherine grew older together with grace and deepening love. They celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1896, surrounded by their children, now ranging from young adults to teenagers. James was 20, working with his father breeding horses and considering starting his own ranch. Emma was 18, beautiful and smart, with several suitors despite her insistence that none of them could measure up to her father. Isaac was 48 now, his dark hair more silver than brown, but his body still strong from years of hard work. Catherine was 43, laugh lines around her eyes and mouth, her auburn hair streaked with white. To Isaac, she had never been more beautiful. They still sat together in silence sometimes, on the porch or in the meadow, holding hands and watching the mountains that had brought them together. The children, grown now and understanding their parents in ways they had not as youngsters, would see them sitting there and smile, recognizing the deep connection that needed no words. Thomas and Martin, now wealthy mine owners, remained close friends. They visited several times a year, and their children had grown up playing with Catherine and Isaac's children. The bond formed years ago during a desperate rescue had never weakened. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1897, and Catherine wept at the funeral. The boarding house keeper had been one of the first people to show her kindness in Rock Springs, one of the few who had never made her feel strange for her silence. They buried her in the cemetery overlooking the town, and Catherine placed wildflowers on her grave every week that summer. The refuge house for women continued to thrive, now in its second decade of operation. Mrs. Crane had trained assistants to help with the increased demand, and the house had expanded twice. Hundreds of women had passed through its doors, finding safety and a chance to rebuild their lives. Some stayed in Rock Springs, becoming part of the community. Others moved on to new places, carrying with them the knowledge that they had worth and strength. In the winter of 1899, as the century drew to a close, Isaac and Catherine sat by the fire in their home, children grown and scattered to their own lives though still close by. James had indeed started his own ranch with a wife and baby daughter. Emma had married a schoolteacher, a quiet man much like her father. Benjamin was working as a guide for hunters and tourists in the mountains. The twins, Sarah and Rebecca, were 17 now, full of life and dreams. "Do you ever think about how different life would have been if I had not sat down beside you that first day?" Isaac asked, his arm around Catherine's shoulders. Catherine leaned against him, perfectly content. "I try not to," she said. "I cannot imagine life without you, without our children, without all of this. That first version of myself, the silent woman on the bench, she seems like a stranger now. You helped me become who I was always meant to be." "You did that yourself," Isaac corrected gently. "I just loved you while you figured it out." "That was everything," Catherine said. "Being loved without conditions, without demands to change or be different. That was what set me free. You gave me the safety to find my own voice again, to choose when to use it and when to embrace silence. That was your gift to me, Isaac Norwood, my mountain man who loved the quiet." Isaac kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent that was uniquely hers, unchanged after more than 20 years together. "And you gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. A family, a purpose, a reason to come down from the mountains. Before you, I was just existing. You taught me how to truly live." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, warm and safe in the home they had built together. It was a silence filled with love and memory, with shared history and deep understanding. It was the silence of two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. As the new century dawned, Isaac and Catherine entered their 50s surrounded by family and love. They had grandchildren now, small hands reaching for them, small voices calling them grandpa and grandma. They had success in their horse breeding business, respect in the community, and the satisfaction of knowing they had helped countless people through quiet generosity. But most importantly, they had each other. The mountain man and the woman who once never spoke had created a love story that would be told in Rock Springs for generations. It was a story about the power of acceptance, about finding someone who loves you exactly as you are. It was about the communication that happens in silence and the words that matter most. On their 25th anniversary in 1901, Isaac gave Catherine one more gift. He had been working on it in secret for months, stealing time in his workshop when she thought he was doing ordinary tasks. It was a memory box, larger and more elaborate than the first one he had made her, inlaid with different woods to create an image of mountains at sunset. Inside, he had placed every small gift he had given her during their courtship, the ones she had kept all these years. But he had also added new things. Pressed flowers from their wedding day that he had saved, the first tiny shoe James had worn, a lock of each child's baby hair, photographs of their family through the years. It was their life together, preserved in a beautiful box. Catherine wept when she saw it, overcome with emotion. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Everything we are, everything we have been, all held in one place." 25 years, Isaac said, wonder in his voice. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I saw you sitting on that bench. Other times it feels like you have been part of my life forever, like I cannot remember existing without you." "Forever," Catherine agreed. "That is how long I want with you, forever and a day beyond that." They threw a party for their anniversary, inviting everyone who mattered to them. The house overflowed with people, their children and grandchildren, Thomas and Martin and their families, friends from town, women who had stayed at the refuge house and wanted to thank Catherine. There was food and music, laughter and stories. But in the middle of the celebration, Isaac and Catherine slipped away to their meadow, needing a moment of quiet together. They stood hand in hand, watching the sun sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. "Do you remember what you said to me that day I proposed?" Isaac asked softly. "I said yes," Catherine replied with a smile. "Before that, you said you could speak but chose not to, but for me you would choose differently. That is still the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, Catherine. Not your words themselves, but your choice to share them with me." Catherine turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "And you gave me the gift of knowing that silence and speech are both valuable, that I did not have to choose one or the other forever. You taught me that there is power in both, that I could embrace all parts of myself. Isaac Norwood, you saved my life in ways you cannot even imagine." "You saved mine too," Isaac said. "I was slowly dying in these mountains, alone and thinking I preferred it. You brought me back to life, showed me that connection and family and love were worth the risk of being hurt. We saved each other, Catherine. That is what made us perfect together." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two souls united by an unconventional love story that had endured and grown stronger with each passing year. When they finally walked back to the celebration, hands still joined, they found their family waiting with smiles and raised glasses. James stood to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Who taught all of us that love is not about changing someone to fit your expectations, but about accepting them exactly as they are? Who showed us that silence can be just as powerful as words, and that the most important conversations often happen without speaking at all? To Isaac and Catherine Norwood, may we all be lucky enough to find a love like theirs. Everyone drank and cheered, and Catherine felt tears slide down her cheeks. She looked around at all these people, this life she had built from nothing, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She had run to Rock Springs seeking escape, seeking a place to hide from a world that demanded she be something she was not. Instead, she had found home, had found love, had found herself. As the party continued around them, Isaac pulled Catherine close and whispered in her ear, "I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you on that bench, and I will love you until I take my last breath." Catherine tilted her face up to his, her green eyes shining with unshed tears and profound joy. "And I love you, my mountain man. Thank you for sitting with me in silence all those years ago. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They stayed at the party for hours more, celebrating with their loved ones, but their hearts remained in that private moment, that exchange of love and gratitude that summed up 25 years of marriage. Later, much later, when everyone had finally gone home and the house was quiet again, Isaac and Catherine climbed into their bed, still talking softly about the evening, about their children, about their plans for the years ahead. "I want to grow old with you," Catherine said as sleep began to claim her. "I want to sit on the porch when we are 80 and watch the mountains together in silence, still holding hands like we did at the beginning." "That is exactly what we will do," Isaac promised, pulling her close. "Together. Always together." And that is exactly what they did. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure, as all lives do. But Isaac and Catherine faced everything together, their love only deepening with time. They did grow old on that porch, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the lessons their matriarch and patriarch had taught about love, acceptance, and the power of choosing your own path. The woman who had never spoken found her voice without losing her love of silence. The mountain man who had lived alone discovered that family was the greatest treasure of all. Together, they built a legacy that lasted far beyond their years, a story of unconventional love that inspired generations to come. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, people still told the story of the mountain man who loved the quiet woman and sat with her in silence, and how that simple act of acceptance changed both their lives forever. Their love story became legend, but to Isaac and Catherine, it was simply their life, beautiful, imperfect, and wholly their own.